My name is Nathan Alex Franco. As you have heard from previous testimonies, many of the species making the creation of these species a violation. This is a record of my time as an InGen Ranger during Project Regenesis.
Chapter 1. The sound of the Jeep's tires roared across the dirt trail, echoing through the deep, pitch-black forest around us. Sounds of carnivores growled from the depths of the foliage as we passed by, the roaring of the Jeep disturbing their sleep. A voice came onto my radio.
Franco, we're redirecting all current Ranger teams back into administration, waiving potentially major compromise in our security.
Dr. Burton spoke, his tone filled with anger and uncertainty. I looked to the driver, Foster, one of our new recruits. His eyes completely focused on the road, obviously ignoring what was said over the radio. After what happened last month, we received a new team of mercenaries to replace the casualties inflicted by these escaped animals. I knew InGen wouldn't bother with proper background checks. It's hard to find. Legit employees in the business is less than legal. As we approached the coastline, we passed by a massive expanse of footprints. The ground began to rumble gently as we heard low squeaks and calls coming from ahead of us. I took out my rangefinder and looked out to the horizon to see the massive flock of Galamines, varying patterns of bright and dark orange-brown, some spotted and some striped. We followed the flock for several minutes, monitoring their behavior and mapping the smooth migration path. Eventually, the coyote stopped to rest. I motioned to Foster to pull us into the tree line away from the animals so we could better observe them from afar. Several of them grouped into pairs, dancing around each other, stomping their feet rhythmically, flapping their arms as if they were birds with wings. Some of the lone assets turned around in the middle of their dancing and spotted us in the bushes, letting out a piercing screech alerting the flock to our presence. They turned to the jungle, leaving a massive cloud of sand in their wake as it disappeared into the dense foliage. Jacob let out a disappointed sigh. The Galamines are always so twitchy. It has become more and more difficult to study their behaviors. We turned onto a dirt road leading towards the compound. I recalled the moment I was issued my replacement staff. Most of the people I'd never heard of in the field before. Gabrielle, Bradford, Hernandez, Foster, Moore, Armstrong, and Harvard. Any one of them could be a spy. This is why I insisted on choosing my own men. Even still, I had worked with Goff and Parkby back in Beirut. There's no guarantee either of them are still legit after a big attack. Lord knows that has changed. The sky turned brilliant orange and the sun set across the trees canopy, walking in the sunlight and casting shadows on either side of the road. The radio began to static and warped speech came through. I grabbed the device in my vest pocket. Command, do you read? Over. The radio stayed silent. Static came through. And fell silent again. I looked to the driver, his eyes still focused on the road, and his eyes slightly gripping the wheel. The rubber slipped with sweat. He was nervous. His eyes darted to me, and we locked for what felt like minutes. The tire shrieked violently off the trail, leapt into the woods. I stumbled back and fell off the road, rolling onto the greenery and twigs cutting my arms and face. I was dazed, entranced by the vertigo and coughing up as my lungs recovered from the wind getting knocked out of me. I heard gunshots in the distance, followed by the sound of a massive crash and the creaking of trees. Snapping branches echoed through the jungle, and the creaking of wood roared as the Jeep finally came to a stop. I ran into the woods to find Jacob. I found Jacob in a bush, knocked out but breathing. I grabbed him and shook him awake.
Where did Foster go? That SOB tried to shoot me.
Jacob's voice was panicked. His eyes were still recovering from his fall. Hernandez's voice called out from the distance, as if through a radio. He followed the noise to its origin and found our jeep crash into a massive tree. Foster's body lay there and blood pooled below him into the ground. The windshield was shattered, and the frame stained crimson.
Chapter 2.
Walking through the sun setting on the prehistoric jungle by foot is a daunting task. Minutes turn to hours as if the world becomes slower, as if the jungle itself is pulling us further away from our destination. Every creaking of wood, rustling of ferns and branches, every little sound could mean a predator stalking us. And it meant the end of our lives. The trees seemed to repeat, every nook and cranny, every boulder was the same as the previous. We were too far off the trail. We were lost. The radio still crackled static after switching the knob on. Something clearly happened to the communication tower. Was the power cut? And if so, what was keeping the animals out of the compound? And what was keeping the experiments inside contained? The sound of rushing water filled our ears, and a wash of relief ran over the river. The sound became more prevalent as we grew closer to the rapids. The river flowed downstream towards the beach, crashing against the rocks on the bankside. If we could stay close to the river, our presence would be drowned out by the rapids. We go up the river, stay close till we reach the swamp and hug the tree line. I turned to Jacob. That should put us within spitting distance of the administration building. Jacob looked at me with a furrowed brow.
Now, how long are we expecting this walk? The sun won't stick around much longer.
Maybe 2 hours, if we don't deviate from the river or tree line. The more I thought about my plan, the more anxiety kept building. I could really tell the night was far from over. Anything could still happen, especially with the administration being a lot power. The minutes passed like the trees stopped raining down dark, and the sounds of the rapids calmed as we approached flatter land and stiller water. The aroma of the swamp plagued the air, and mosquitoes buzzed all around our ears. So much the river fell mute. As we grew closer to the crossing point, the doubt ran rampant in my mind over every little detail that could go wrong and spell our deaths. Just before we reached the river bend where I had planned for it to cross, one of my worst-case scenarios had breached the foliage onto the riverbank, on the side of the water. The hissing of a velociraptor doesn't fade from your memory easily. I turned to Jacob to quietly duck behind the grass before the predator could see us. The river still made just enough noise to mask our panicking footsteps, but not enough to drown out its calls. Its trips erupted from its mouth with the sound of metal scraping against itself, jerking its body from side to side like it was looking for its partners. It was alone. The velociraptor perked up carefully, listening for responding calls from its pack, but only the river could be heard. Rays of blinding light shined through the dense foliage as the sun finally breached below the canopy, and the raptor recoiled and hissed as the light hit its orange-red eye. My mind raced as I contemplated how to ford across without attracting the raptor's attention. Without any clear option, I grabbed the rifle from my back and clutched it tight in my arms. I raised just above the rock to take my aim, but as I rested the rifle on the rock, the water surface exploded. In an instant, the raptor was in the jaws of, at least what seemed to be, an alligator. The animal dwarfed any I'd ever seen before, able to fit the entire raptor's body in its jaws and easily dragging it under the water. Bubbles rushed to the surface as if the water was boiling in that one spot before disappearing. It was clear now we wouldn't be crossing the river after all. I looked at Jacob, and then over to the swamp.
What was that thing?
We've seen our fair share of monsters on this island, I chipped in. Besides the powerhouse be out, there's nothing keeping the experiments inside the facility. It must be where that came from. We paused and looked over to the riverbank, slowly stepping back from the water before the alligator had a chance to take a strike at us. We continued through the swamp. I'm not taking our chances crossing the river, I continued. There will be shallower water, not deep enough for something like that to hide in it. I placed my hand on his shoulder and took my rifle with my other. Any other ideas? Now's the time, he responded by simply shaking his head and grabbing the knife from his vest. We turned and walked up the river towards the wetlands. Chapter 3. The sun finally disappeared, shadows now covering every inch of the island. Moonlight briefly shining through in the swamp water, shimmering like a candle flame. Bullfrog croaks echoed off the trees in an eerie ambiance, harmonizing in deep, dramatic crescendos. Our steps were loud and sloppy, stepping in the thick mud, revealing our location to the entire island. The snores of large crocodilian dinosaurs resonated like the startup of a large, imposing and obnoxious. I stopped walking, and Jacob stopped behind me. There was a noise behind us. It sounded like animals walking, and they were getting closer. I looked around and shined my flashlight at the animal. The four stood near a medium-sized brown animal, walking on all fours with its legs. It seemed smaller than its cousins, with a small bump on the very top of its head, and bright stripes ran down its spine, Grythosaurus. After its accidental release, the Spinosaurus had decimated the population of several species, including causing the Grythosaurus population to go extinct. A sense of wonder washed over me as I watched it return to the island. Almost a dozen stepped out of the shadows into the moonlight, grazing ferns off the swamp ground, completely unbothered by our lights. Jacob stood up to watch them, taking in the beauty of the animal's first time in the wild. A few specimens looked up to the sky, taking in the sense around them, before parking towards branches. I took out my light again, perched it to where the Grythosaurus were staring. On the branches stood a large bat-like creature, with a long snout and a ridge pronounced at the end of it. Rager's sharp fangs all down its beak. It snarled as I shined my light into its eyes. It flapped its wings and hurled itself from the trees towards me. Jacob dove in front and grabbed the animal, wrestling it down and holding its mouth shut. Another side-blinded me and knocked me into the water. The slimy ground moved out from under me as a young baryonyx suddenly jolted up at the disturbance. The dinosaur roared at me and snapped its jaws, once again pushing me onto the other side of the pool of swamp water. The bat-like creature hopped onto the baryonyx's back and bit into its neck, piercing it with inch-long teeth. The baryonyx hissed and snapped at the creature, ripping its body from its throat and flinging it at a tree. Two more of the animals swooped down, taking bites at the crocodilian-like dinosaur. Jacob got out and kicked in the head of the creature he had caught. The animal collapsed under him and took off west. As we ran through the swamp, we awoke a massive herd of Parasaurolophus, rooting to each other as danger approached their resting grounds. The massive animals tripped into the water, erupting explosions of water around us. The baryonyx leapt from the water at one of the juveniles, dragging it under, its mother leaping in after, pulling the carnivore from the water and allowing her baby to run off with the herd. The massive parasaur jumped up on its hind legs, bellowing and smashing down onto the baryonyx. A massive cracking sound snapped out from under the parasaur. She stepped out of the water, running towards her herd. The body of the baryonyx lay there twitchy in the murky water. The dust settled on the still water. Distant howls of the parasaur herd drifted in the wind as they moved. Distant howls of the parasaur herd drifted in the wind as they receded deeper into the marshlands. Jacob sat in the mud, hyperventilating, shivering and choking on his own breaths. I helped him up, patting him on the shoulder as he collected his thoughts. And we rested next to the dead baryonyx for half an hour. When we continued, we noticed much more activity than before. Silhouettes of massive herding animals walked past us in the shadows. And screaming of the bat-like pterosaurs came from the distance. Chapter 4. The screeching grew closer and closer, like we were walking backwards towards the pterosaurs. I thought of running, but conserving our energy was more important. We still had a long way to go. It didn't take long for the calls to pass us and come from ahead. I took out my light and shined into the tree's branches, but nothing sat on top. Suddenly the calls had stopped. The animals were nowhere to be found. Jacob and I stood backs turned to each other, watching our rears standing in the silent darkness, waiting for the monsters to pop out from behind the trees. I unholstered my pistol and took aim where the sound had stopped, staring intently into the void, waiting for a mouthful of teeth to come crawling out behind. Waiting. With a massive screech, one flies out from the left tree. Drops to the ground in front of me. Jacob wasn't as good of a shot. Latching onto his shoulder, his screams alerted me to their danger. Blood splashed into the animal's elongated mouth as it bit down on my friend's shoulder, pointed my gun point blank against the creature's skull and pulled the trigger. I quickly sat Jacob down in the swamp and took a look at his shoulder. After patching him up, we were ready to complete our trek. One final haul out of the forest and towards the ridge past the trees. I could see the moonlight itself cast on an open field. We were finally out. Down the tree line of the forest edge, I could see the distant box of concrete. Jacob fell to his knees at the sight of the administration building. We had finally made it. Chapter 5. Chapter 9. Walking up to the gate, I could already see the carnage left in the wake of the blackout. Several bodies of failed experiments and oversized reptiles littered the ground around the fencing, and through the darkness I could see campfire light. I approached my men sitting around the fire tending to their wounds. They all stood up to greet our return, and we celebrated our survival. Dr. Burton and Dr. Florence stepped out of the lab with medical supplies and food rations. They seemed delighted by our return and eager to fill us in with what had happened.
It would seem Hernandez, Reese, Armstrong, Todd, and Foster turned traitor.
Burton spoke.
The first three were the ones who cut the power.
Well, Foster isn't a problem.
Jacob quipped.
Todd also failed to kill McLarty and Tyson. He locked him in the cold storage until he wakes up.
Florence added. What about power? A burning question on my mind. How are we going to get it back up? Florence answered me almost immediately.
Hudson and Richards are on it. They left about 30 minutes ago.
It's about 4 hours to get up that hill.
Jacob whined. I told Jacob to rest in his tent and wait it out. I pulled Burton outside from the group. Damage report.
Power will be back on by the time that conversation is over.
What can we do with no power?
Keep the assets out of the compound.
Munitions.
Oh, plenty. We have extra crates out in the back building.
We need to discuss our escapees. Burton handed me a large stack of papers, dossiers of every animal they brought back. As I flipped through, he began informing me on the animals we needed to track down.
We aren't worried about all 20 escapees. Some are repopulation efforts like our Corythosaurus and Ouranosaurus. The more unique species are new tests, and the escaped carnivores are what we're worried about.
Walk me through them.
Acrocanthosaurus and Carcharodontosaurus. There are new, larger theropods. They're not quite as big as Tyrannosaur. One is identified by tall neural spines on its back. The other is much bulkier. With the early release of Spinosaurus, it's far too early for another large carnivore to be introduced to the ecosystem, much less two of them. Deinosuchus, an alligatoroid, 35 feet long, 23,500 psi of bite force. If they aren't rounded up, they may eat through the entire river population within a month. Ornithochirus, a pterosaur. A failure in incubation caused improper hormone balance in their brains, causing them to be incredibly violent. Dropiognathus. Perfected genome sequencing was achieved by switching Ornithochirus to its much larger cousin, Dropiognathus. The animal's size made it hard to contain and had to be regularly drugged as it reached maturity. Again, there's plenty more where that came from, but we'll worry about them later. Right now, We need to focus on the animals that pose a threat to the ecosystem.
We retired for the night. Power came back on shortly after the meeting, and we all gathered around the campfire in the morning to discuss plans. I led the meeting. Unfortunately, the animals trackers weren't activated. The eggheads in the lab are working on them now. All of these animals are incredibly dangerous, some of them being apex predators. The crew's faces went pale as we passed out dossiers of the escaped animals. The next week isn't going to be easy. These animals need to be recaptured, or, if need be, put down before significant damage is done to the island. We can't afford mistakes. We're on borrowed time. Hit the sack, count your blessings. As the sun rose, my men went to sleep. As the sun rose, my men went to sleep off their injuries. I looked out past the fence, and the trees I saw a shadow move through, receding into the forest. "Any news on Miranda's?" I asked Burden as he stepped away. Turning around, he replied,
Trail cam caught them heading into Tyrannosaurus territory.
"Do you think they made it?"
Foster has his mission, we have ours. Worry about the others later. Let's get the job done.